Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this event hosted by the Northern Ireland branch. I'm Catherine Hanratty and I'm the chair of the Northern Ireland branch. I'm delighted to introduce this evening Stephen Shaw. He's a design director at Big Motive and he is going to present his work this evening. He has a broad range of experience from product development to game design, content strategy and others. His team at Big Motive have won numerous awards. Recently, the Royal Television Society Interactive Entertainment Award for Tara's Locket, which was a children's storybook in VR. In 2020, he led the design of the StopCOVID NI contact tracing app for Northern Ireland, the first to launch in the UK, and endorsed by the UK ICO as best practice in design for data privacy, and the first in the world to be interoperable with other regions. Stephen, I know that you're going to introduce your company and background as well, so I'm not going to read out all of the information I have in front of me. I just want to welcome Stephen again, and I really look forward to hearing about this very topical project about the contact tracing app for Northern Ireland. And over to you, Stephen. Oh, I should also say to everybody that you're going to be on mute throughout the webinar, but your questions are welcomed, and please submit them via the control panel, and then we'll be happy to deal with those at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine. I am, yes, all that Catherine said. I will take you through a little bit of background on myself and my company, just for context, but I won't give you too much of that. Also, I'm going to switch off my webcam because I believe that can slow things down a little bit, and the slides should hopefully speak for themselves. But whilst I can't see you or hear you, I hope that you are thoroughly entertained and interested. And thanks very much for coming. So if I do this, hopefully now you can see all the slides. Okay, so I've called this Design in Crisis because I'm a designer, and we had to respond, I suppose, to the crisis and the various problems and issues and challenges that were stimulated by the pandemic. And I think whilst I'm a designer with a design background, I've been involved in running these projects for long enough to have an understanding and an amateur's interest in project management, and I think we learned some things during this process that could be really interesting to people who are interested in project management. Let me just see here, sorry. Okay, so just a little bit about my company, Big Motive. We principally work on making digital products and services, so websites, apps, digital products of all kind. We work with large organizations and small, startups, SMEs, all the way through to big government organizations or enterprise folk like Coca-Cola or Liberty. And I guess the thing that we focus on to try and really set apart what we do is the concept of human-centered design, which is essentially understanding the user's perspective, prototyping, and putting things in front of people to test. This is not radical, it's not substantially different from what many other designers do, but I guess that we can honestly say that we stick to the principles and have spent many years honing the methods and the approaches that give the best results in this environment. Just very briefly, to touch on some clients, many years we've worked with the BBC, who are great in terms of human-centered design, prototyping. They love to make pilots and test things, so we fit really nicely in with their own way of working. Equally, we've worked with universities, including the Hasselplattner School in Stanford in California, which is super exciting for us because if you're interested in what design is doing these days and the principles behind the likes of design thinking, then Stanford is really, the preeminent university in putting structure and framework and thought and academic research behind that. Hopefully you recognize some other logos there as well, and think that's great. Clearly he has some idea of what he's talking about. Just to recap then, I mentioned human-centered design before, and how that is a kind of central tenet that we always believe is important. If we go all the way back to the mid-20th century, people like Victor Papanek were talking about design and talking about ergonomics and talking about human-centeredness in a way that was a little bit different from what had gone before, when, you know, early manufacturing, and especially mass manufacturing of physical products, was very much focused around either decoration or conceding to the machines and the people that made the products in the first place. So I guess the 70s was the beginning of the kind of design that we now practice, and that has informed digital design in all its shapes. And that, I suppose, takes us up to the present day, or at least the early part of the 21st century, when we had people like Tim Brown at IDEO talking about how design needed to be democratized and taken away from these designers that thought of themselves as kind of creative authorities, and involving people and involving ideas and involving movements that were broader than just that narrow world. And it was these guys that kicked off, as I mentioned earlier, design thinking, and, you know, bringing design to try and solve other business problems as well as just product design or even service design problems. This is Nesta's 4 orders of design, which is a relatively recent way of trying to describe all this. So again, forgive me for giving a little bit too much context here, but hopefully this is helpful. The world that we live in, and to just touch on another jargon point here, is the world of UX, or user experience design. Ultimately, design can now see an ability to have influence and add value all the way from the core elements that used to be considered graphic design, like logos and so forth, out to digital products and experiences, into the services themselves. So if we think of a business like Uber, for instance, they're effectively, you know, a taxi company, but the user experience of their digital products, the app for the driver and for the passenger, is so central to the experience that it almost feels like part of the service itself. And it's that blending of the customer experience across different tools and products that I guess is where user experience has become a term that is useful. So that is pretty much the degree of scope that Big Motive gets involved in. But this is all fairly kind of heavy duty theory stuff, and I guess, you know, sometimes reducing these things to a really simple idea is a better way of explaining things. So to try and lighten things up, I've got a little cartoon here that pretty much sums up what it is that we do. We are we're neither the baby nor are we the parent in this scenario. This is the typical situation in which products and services get designed, especially by large organizations. You've got people in authority who choose something that appeals to them, who specify based on things that they like, things that they think are interesting or pretty or suitable, and they don't really think very much about the end user. They don't think, I mean, they probably have some cursory interest in them, and they might refer to user acceptance testing, for instance. But at the outset, especially when it comes to design, the parents in this scenario consider themselves the experts who must decide what to present and what to set up. When in actual fact, the user experience is something probably that if it was on the front of the box, they would not have chosen. I mean, the baby might still like this. I'm sure the music is nice, but the point of this really is that unless you really empathize with the user, unless you spend some time approaching things from their perspective, putting things in front of them, getting their opinion, then you're very likely to fall into the soft toy bum trap, which isn't the thing. I just said that there now. I'm also going to, at this point, engage everyone in some interactive things. So hopefully this works. It's not a terrible car crash. And again, this is just a bit of fun. This is just to try and help you empathize a little bit with me and other designers. And so yeah, without further ado, this is a what happens next exercise, and you're going to be given a chance to give your answer to what you think what happens next in a little poll. So I'm going to play this video. Okay, so number of possibilities here. Maybe an alarm is triggered. Maybe a car rolls into the shop. Maybe there's some kind of crime has been committed and the police arrive and arrest the man. Or maybe he just uses the hand sanitizer. Or potentially you think something completely altogether different happens. And I would love it if you could have a look at the poll, which should have popped up on your screen. I think Rob's got that working there pretty well. And yeah, have a think. What do you think happens next?
Perfect, thank you, Steve.
Really agreed a time limit for this, Rob, have we?
Yeah, people are voting away. So I'll share the results in a couple of moments.
Okay, excellent.
You've definitely got some people stumped. So let's see what happens. Okay, so it looks like all the answers are. Oh no, a couple more coming in. Some people are clearly thinking about the man in the shop and what's going to go. So I will close the poll now, and I will share the results. So you can see 13 people said that the alarm was triggered. 19% said a car rolls into the shop. 0% say the police arrive. 31% says the man uses the hand sanitizer, with 38% saying something else happens.
Very good. Well, interestingly, no people suspected him of criminal activity, so clearly he's an honest-looking gentleman. And I shall reveal the answer. Oh, here now, hold on. There you have it. Something else was the correct answer. He thought that the slushy machine was the hand sanitizer, and it's kind of a perfect example of how a situation that's been designed by people that haven't thought about the customer or the end user or whoever the person they're intending to engage is can fall down. Because of course the slushy machine's there, that's the place where they have the slushy machine, and they've put the hand sanitizer right in the middle of the floor. But the people that designed the hand sanitizer clearly designed it in a way that made it look not like a hand sanitizer, and the slushy machine people never realized that their machine was going to end up looking like a hand sanitizer. And it's exactly these kinds of scenarios that arrive, albeit in slightly less, comic form, although not very comic, because if he had coronavirus, then he's now giving it to a lot of people. It's exactly these kinds of situations that arise when design isn't really considered. It's all about pre-specification of individual elements. It's not thinking about holistic systems or services. And I mean, fair enough, it's only a garage. These people aren't going to commission a design consultants to come in and think about all this stuff. But when that happens on a grand scale, when that happens on a big government program, then suddenly the effects can be disastrous, expensive, and no amount of contractual negotiations, pre-planning, all the things that people put in place to manage risk and protect risk really count for much. What should have happened was a genuine and sincere engagement with design and with the act of testing that really protects from these kinds of risks. So with that in mind, I'm going to quickly sort of hark back. What do we like for time here? Okay, to March 2020, and my company had been working away on all kinds of design projects for the last good few years, probably about 15 years at this stage. And we'd been speaking to the Department of Health in Northern Ireland about a number of potential projects. A new guy called Dan West had come into digital health and care with a remit to look at digital health and how people like us, you know, software engineers as well, might start to work in partnership with the department to look at digital transformation in health and all those kinds of things. But up to this point, we hadn't really landed on a project or an opportunity that worked for everyone. But when coronavirus happened and an emergency response was needed, it was at that point that they said to us, okay, right, we really need to get some help here, and we now need to start to understand what services are going to need to exist in order to deal with this situation. Just rewinding a little bit, one of the reasons why they came to us or why we were on the radar was a couple of years before we were involved in a BBC project called Pandemic, which was sadly pretty prescient insofar as it was a BBC4 program that imagined what would happen in what has now happened. It imagined how spread would occur around different forms of transmission, and we actually designed and contributed to the development of a mobile app, which was, I mean, it simulated the person having a virus. So some of you may have seen this program. It's been played to death on iPlayer recently because it now seems so relevant. But effectively, it was a big citizen science experiment with the London School of Tropical Hygiene and Cambridge University MADS teams to try and gather data that could be used to improve the modeling around the spread of viruses. And they made a TV program about it. And we had a range of different simulations that we created in the phones. So long before there was talk of proximity apps or Bluetooth or decentralized models or whatever, we had built a mobile app that, you know, that tried to do the same thing in reverse almost. So we had this background, and that had gone live and it had done really well. And the science folk, I'm sure there's a better word for them than science folk, the scientists had hoped to get about 10,000 users engaged with this so that their data sets would be much, much improved than where they were. In the end, we got about 90,000 users that completed the study, which was way more than their expectations, and actually means that the data gathered in that experiment was the new global gold standard in looking at human behavior and movement during these kinds of situations. So we had a bit of a kind of a unexpected and unintended expertise in the field. And when unprecedented things happen, and unprecedented being a word that is now so overused that it's almost comical, we had to really sort of go back to basics. And before thinking about designing any products at all, we had to start to think about what are all the different services that need to exist in order for the response to be meaningful. So at the start of this design process, it wasn't about apps, it wasn't about test and trace. It was about, you know, what happens, you know, in care homes when there's an outbreak, and, you know, what happens when people want to get a vaccine, which obviously doesn't even exist yet. So at this point, it was very much a service design project, understanding the user needs, the services that would need to exist to support those. And gradually that matured. Now, actually, gradually is completely the wrong word. Rapidly that matured, because this was happening over a space of a couple of weeks. And we began to realize that there was the first digital product that needed to exist to really deliver on immediate user needs was some kind of symptom checker, or some tool that people could quickly use to decide if they needed to self-isolate or get a test or whatever it is. So out of the service design came the sort of embryonic version of one of the apps. This was originally just a little website, and that began to give us elements, language, and an understanding that developed into what became the first of now 2 mobile apps. This one is COVID NI, which isn't about contact tracing at all. It's very much about checking symptoms, getting advice, booking a test. It's now extended to include content and assistance around mental health. And so we went from a standing start in late March to a version 1 of this product 2 weeks after the whole process began. So we had something in the App Store in combination with a software developer called Civica 2 weeks after the project began. And it was very much, emergency situation, rapid response, kind of wartime mentality amongst all involved. That then matured to something that includes timers for yourself and for your household, so you know how long you've got left to self-isolate, and more complex symptom checking, so that the app's now actually been submitted for medical device approval, because it does effectively deliver a kind of diagnosis. So every iteration gets better and better. Then at the same time, the concept of contact tracing, and especially the contact tracing app came up. Now, at this stage, people were already aware that NHSX and Digital in the UK and England rather were working on something, but there was already some concern that that was taking a bit longer than was expected. And a software developer in the Republic of Ireland called Nearform had rapidly developed a version of the decentralized model, which Apple and Google had come up with for the Republic of Ireland. So there was a piece of technology that already existed, and the Department of Health in the North said, look, Big Motive, could you look at this technology and think of an experience that you could frame around that, so that we could launch this as a standalone app? Let's not build it into the existing symptom checker app, because people still have privacy concerns and people aren't really super comfortable about this yet. So what do we do to really rapidly get something out and into the App Store? So that's where the service design again, sort of dove down into much more specific digital product design. And we ended up with, I think, now this took a little bit longer. This was about a 4-week sprint to go from start to launch in the App Store. But we developed, or rather we designed, a very simple contact tracing app that did all the important things that it needed to do over that rapid period. So, it allows you to switch on the contact tracing and use it and get the alerts. It allows you to put in a test result and then inform other people. And it also allows you to advocate, I suppose, pardon me, use of the app for others as well, because it's really, really important that as many people use the app as possible if it's to be effective. So that has continued to grow with various new features. There's now quite an established kind of visual design system that works across all the apps. And at the moment, we are working on a version to build additional features around specific advice on how long people need to self-isolate, and also a certificate that people can use to give to their employer to prove that they've been given a notification. But that's the background. What did we learn from this that might be interesting to other people? It all happened very fast, so I had to think quite hard about this, but I did come to a series of things that I thought, right, I did not know this before we started, and I think some of the things that happened were pretty powerful in terms of insights into the kinds of challenges and responses that we can use. So the first of these, and there's about 5 of them, so it won't take too much longer. Just to sort of quote the book about Donald Trump, because I love quoting about things about Donald Trump. The rate at which things needed to happen was both a challenge and an opportunity. Yes, that's my Trump gif. Again, things were unprecedented and everyone was having a complete panic. So right at the beginning, there was just too much. But we had, I guess, over the last couple of years, just by chance, largely out of actually working with startups and trying to find ways to run design programs with startups that didn't, become hugely expensive, had looked at this concept, which was written about in a great little book called Lean UX. And the idea here was that you could combine the design processes and the validation and testing processes with the actual product development and software engineering processes. This is a very complicated looking diagram, which I've put in to create the impression that I understand these things more than I do. But this is what's technically called dual track Agile. So I'm sure you're all familiar with, Agile as a sort of kind of project management methodology. Dual track Agile is a kind of condensed version that makes the assumption that thinking of these things as being independent work streams, design and development, kind of works against you. And actually, if everyone involved can buy into like a closely linked and interconnected and codependent work stream, tends to work a bit better. So what we said to Nearform and all the other partners was, let's use dual track Agile as a means of approaching this, which was kind of cheeky because we're a small company and Nearform are a very big company. But I think they believed in the spirit of it, and it wasn't so different from what they do. And so this combination of blended work streams worked really well in that fast-paced environment. If anything, it meant people were more engaged. If anything, it meant that the people were more accountable without the need for lots and lots and lots of project documentation and artifacts. And again, just a little cartoon to sort of like try and sum this point up. It's not about keeping on going and waiting until you have 1,000,000% proof that the decision's right. It was about doing enough to know that you're confident to make progress and then moving ahead with that together. Testing is super important, but over testing isn't something that we had time for, frankly. The second thing that we discovered during this process was that the research that we were doing in testing the product with users and interviewing people of all kinds was not only good for the design and the outcome of the product and the service, it also was hugely valuable as a tool for leverage in other parts of the project. So we did, for example, testing with kids really from the age of 11 to 15, because we were designing, I think this was version 2 of the app, so that young people could use it as well. Previously, it had been 16 and over because of data protection and concerns that the ICO had raised around consent and understanding. So we did a bunch of research with young people, and we understood after that an awful lot more about what they wanted in the products. But it also meant that we engaged with I'm going to come back to this. It also meant we engaged with the Children's Commissioner, with the Children's Law Centre, and with the ICO themselves. And that engagement led to their endorsement. It wasn't intended. We didn't set out to go, we need to get these guys on board. It was more, they can help us, you know, make the right decisions here. And then suddenly, Nikki were at the press release, and the Children's Law Centre, you know, were writing articles about why young people should use this and how great it was. And it also meant that when we went to the ICO and said, you know, this is what we're going to do, and they came back and said, no, we need to have, you know, another 3 pages of terms and conditions in the onboarding process, we could say, look, here's the research. You know, you can speak to Nikki, you can speak to the Children's Law Centre. You know, we will bar users from accessing the service if we make this too onerous in text. So we were able to have a debate with the ICO that was informed, and in the end achieve an experience that they were happy with and we were happy with, without too much compromise. I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep moving here. Next, and this is something you perhaps are all familiar with, so I'll not dwell on it too much, but collaboration across different platforms is great, but channeling the collaboration was something that when we got it right worked really well. And what I mean by that is we had effectively sort of 4 parties involved in the project. We had management, which was our Department of Health colleagues. We had design, which is Big Motive. We had development, which was Nearform, and we had testing, which was an expert testing company called Explio. And we were using a combination of Zoom, Miro, Figma, Slack, and email to communicate together. But what we realized was that if we kept different types of people and different types of communication within these different channels, we could be much more effective. So for example, with the Slack channel, it was just design, development, and testing. So we could have open conversations, unafraid conversations. We could be very honest about things that were going well and not going well without feeling like we were oversharing with the Department of Health. So if there was a panic because something wasn't working properly, people could go onto Slack and say, hey, is there any way you could give us a hand with this? And we could work that out collaboratively. Equally, on the other side, on the right, when we're talking about money and finances, you know, we deal directly by email just with the Department of Health. So there's no cross communication there. Everything's private. There's no, you know, commercial confidentiality problems. And then the main work streams happened in Zoom, a platform, web-based platform called Miro, which is like a whiteboard, and Figma, which is like a design tool that we can involve and share with lots of other people. Some of you may be familiar with these, some of you may not. I'll not go into the detail on them because it's not really for now, but these are extremely powerful tools that allowed us to effectively deliver all aspects of the work in a way that I think a year ago we wouldn't even consider possible. And just to give a little bit of moment of time to why these things work and to talk about video games, which is something that I always love to talk about. Something really interesting has happened with a lot of these collaborative tools recently. They've involved a kind of multiplayer aspect to them, which is now matured to the point where it's really effective. So this has been in games for a long time, from arcades all the way through to Call of Duty. And these days it's now in tools like Miro. So if you're not familiar with this, and forgive me if you are, you can all go to the same board on the same website and type and write and move things around and, you know, add information and create almost kind of live post-it notes in a way that allows really, really rapid discussion, arguably even more rapid than in a traditional workshop with a traditional whiteboard. So we find that hugely useful. This is just a quick screen grab of the Figma board, which is the design tool we use, which shows, in this case, a system map of all the screens and units and components and design atoms and everything that is in the app for contact tracing. And you can zoom right into that and see the detail of a couple of screens. You can zoom back out again, and you can zoom in and you can see specific information about the way certain things should behave. And as these mature and are shared, this is something shared by everyone. So the clinicians, the chief medical officer, they can look at this, they can add notes. Software engineers go in, they know exactly how things need to work. So there's a common understanding about what the product should do and what it should be, that's highly visual and that is accessible. So had this been a traditional, specification document, it would have been, I don't know, hundreds of pages by the time we would have got all these screens broken up. But the power of these tools allows this to become a much more accessible and rapidly interactive kind of environment. Conscious of time again, so I'll keep moving. Something else we learned here, and this was, I guess, something that was of benefit more to the department than to us, was that we really can stack the value from a lot of these assets. So when the design process is happening and the development process is happening, a lot of the things that are created can be used in other contexts. So for example, these design components that we used for the app started to get used in a website that was being used by another department in another part of Northern Ireland. And so there was consistency across the experience. So we've created a kind of design language almost that crosses the boundaries, that's now used in, say, the TV advertising, as well as in, as I mentioned, the other citizen information websites. So you find that people begin to adopt good, tested, effective design in a way that is great for them, great for the people that have created it in the first place, because it endorses your work, and ultimately takes you to a place where you get more and better feedback, because you're not just hearing from your own users, you're hearing from other people who are using it and repurposing it. That's just some website screen grabs of that other site. And yes, when we came to using it with young people, we set up some photo shoots and things so that we could have a record of the work that we done. And then when we gave that to the department as well, they were able to use that in promotions and so forth with schools. So everyone sharing the work they were doing was creating a really dynamic and effective kind of working relationship. And that takes me on to my penultimate point, which is kind of the same thing, but slightly different. Everything we did was open sourced. Now that was partly because we wanted to be transparent. We wanted people to believe in the work that we were doing, to be able to scrutinize it and be confident that there was no, malevolent deep state tracing of citizens going on, that it genuinely was open. So the first version of the app was released. All of the components that we did for the app and the design system were published, along with all of the code and the code repositories, and everything that was used to make the app is and was and is rather still live on a website for anyone to go and download. And that's a principle that's come from software. Open sourcing and sharing of things is very much a software way of describing it. But again, this was hugely valuable in discussions with the Information Commissioner's Office, because they felt that the kind of citizen scrutiny of what we were doing was another endorsement of the work that they were doing. And just to sort of underpin that, when Scotland came to roll out their app, they literally used the design patterns. You can see the comparison is almost word for word there. Something which we are more than happy with. That's wonderful. It means that all the work that we did gets, to see, I don't know, another context as well. But also, when Scotland are having their own negotiations with the ICO or whoever else is scrutinizing them, they're building on the value that was created and developed in the first place. And so just to sort of finish up here, I guess not over specifying was quite central to the to the whole process. And I guess I've spoken about that in a couple of other points along the way here. But this principle, which again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, if not all of you, kind of became the guiding principle at every stage of what we were doing. Again, this came from the software development world, but the idea that we would, with each phase of work, have a series of central must-have requirements. So the app, website, service, whatever, must do these things. It should do these other things. So these are super important. It could, if we have time, do these, and it definitely won't have these next things now. Was a fantastically useful way of agreeing and maintaining agreement that meant that we weren't slowed down by requirements documents, by debate over what was in or out of scope, by the usual sort of frustrating tangles that people can get into. And of course, this was a bit easier in some ways because it was an emergency and, people are more flexible by definition. But I believe that if these principles could start to be used more widely, and over-specification was avoided, a lot of similar projects could happen as fast and with the same level of success, and actually be less risky than I think people realize they might be. So just to finish, you can't please everyone all of the time. This is a little screen grab. Some of our wonderful customers. You can see we had somebody who could barely bring themselves to write more than the word awful twice. Then we had a super person who said it was super and great. And then right down at the bottom, we've got the curmudgeons who were frustrated that the first person wasn't in the Irish language. And there is now a planned version for the Irish language. And I guess this is just really to say that, you never get everything 100% right, but you can make an awful lot of progress and you can do an awful lot of good things by focusing on listening to the people whose problems you're actually trying to solve. And we did end up with being first to market in the UK with a symptom checker app, first in the UK with a proximity app, and actually the first in the world with a proximity app or a contact tracing app that can be used by 11 to 15-year-olds. And so far in Northern Ireland, we've got about 500,000 or more downloads. And I suppose the most important number in this page is that to date, we reckon we've probably reduced call burden on GP and GP out of our services by about 8,000 hours, which is something the Department of Health are delighted about and something which you can point to and say, look, that's a metric that we talked about at the beginning and we can honestly say we landed on. So that is all from me in terms of the monologue. Rob, would you be happy to chair and organize the questions?
Yeah, no, certainly, Stephen. But firstly, thank you for sharing such a knowledgeable presentation, and congrats on all your achievements that are shown in the last couple of slides there.
Thanks.
So I'm collating a couple of the questions. I think probably one that sticks out at first is, what did Northern Ireland do differently that enabled all this?
Okay, so in some ways Northern Ireland had a little bit easier because we're a much smaller nation stroke region than anywhere else. So there are fewer people in senior positions. And I think I mentioned earlier on the guy, Dan West, who came in as the new Chief Digital Information Officer. He pretty much had free rein to make this happen. And the politics were not constraining us. What was happening in England was being quite publicly scrutinized and criticized. So they were kind of, we were learning from some of their troubles. But it is, I think, really important to note that having the headroom, having the autonomy to do this, and being free of that over-specification and the burden of constraints around, this has to be this has to meet X, Y, and Z standards, for example, was hugely important. And I think perhaps in other parts of the UK, there was so much thinking around how clever the product could be that they got in a bit of a muddle, and we were protected from that.
Excellent, thank you. So Michael has submitted a question, and I don't think he's the one that put awful on your app review, because he started with, the app is slick. How did you find the collaboration with the HSCNI? Were the goalposts moved repeatedly, or was it plain sailing? Is Michael's question.
So the goalposts were moved, but because there was this common appreciation that the moving of the goalposts would have to always involve reprioritization, that it worked out okay. I mean, literally every day something new would happen, whether that be new regulation, feedback from the ICO, changes in the specification from Apple and Google. But I guess it was an acceptance that we would all find a way through, and that the decisions would be made together, were how we dealt with those moving of goalposts.
Excellent, thank you. So Theo has asked a question and then shared his insight alongside that. And the question was, do you think the emergency/rapid response project delivery ended up being more efficient in the end, and then in brackets cost/quality? The default is to assume to do something quicker will either cost more or reduce the quality, increase the risk of faults. And then in Theo's experience, sometimes delivering projects with less governance, because it's allowed in an emergency, can be more efficient and achieve the same results. And so that's that part of the question.
Okay, well, shall I deal with that one first?
If you could, that'd be great. Thank you. Yep,
certainly. It's a really good point. That's I would completely agree with that, Theo. I would. It's not a panacea. You know, rushing through everything is not a panacea. But I do think that there was a degree of appreciation that we can't have a drop in quality, because this is going to go out to the whole population and the eyes of everyone are on us. There has to be management of cost, because Northern Ireland's not a big part of the world. We can't spend 23 million on this. But what we can flex on is the complexity and the scope. So when we decide to do a contact tracing app, we're only going to make it do contact tracing. And all of the other ideas that people have about, oh, could we get a postcode checker in here, or could we get something for the researchers in the public health agency to get data on X, Y, and Z? Those discussions are the ones where there's flexibility, and that enables the quality and the speed to be maintained.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen. I'll move on to Theo's second part, and he's asked, do you have any other tips or examples of tools which help with your product delivery at Big Motif? Apps, meeting styles, management models, etc.
Yes, okay. I mentioned sort of design thinking as a principle earlier on, and we would be pretty excited, I guess, about how some of the principles in that can feed into the work that we do. So, for example, we would often deliver certainly the initial parts of projects as a design sprint. So the week-long, go from zero, get to a tested prototype by Friday is something that we found very useful. And even though this was a bit messier because everything was in such a rush, we did effectively use the kind of the bare bones design sprint process through each of the product design cycles to get us to where we needed to go. So when we tested a prototype with users, we'd spun something up really rapidly in Figma. And I think we also used InVision which is another prototyping tool. And we use the same kind of user interview structure and scripts. So yes, in this context, the design sprint was a really great little methodology that proved its worth over and over again.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. And Theo, I hope that helps. So Ashok's asked, he would be interested to know what were the major benefits and the objectives of the project.
So the objectives were to develop services and products to respond to the emerging needs of the Department of Health effectively. So at the beginning, the objectives were quite vague. It was almost to try and, corral all of these needs and start to map them out across the flows that would be required. I guess now that everything's matured, the objectives have crystallized into things like we need to reduce the number of calls to GPs. We need to reduce the number of calls to manual contact tracing because right now in Northern Ireland, they're overwhelmed. So the more people that use the app, the more manual contact tracers can focus on folk that aren't. And I guess in terms of successes, it would be, again, connected to those reduction of pressure on existing services. So at the moment, we are now at a kind of, I think the app is effectively, on average, contacting 3, I've forgotten the statistic. They have a number that they use to measure the effectiveness of contact tracing, and at the moment the app is at a 3 and the manual contact tracing is at a 2. So it's actually outperforming it at the minute, which means we know it's helping.
Excellent. That's a great benchmark of success. So congratulations there. Martin has asked, he started off by saying great presentation, and then he said, how were you engaged by the HSC? Were you already a provider or did you have to tender for it?
That's a very good question. We were procured under emergency powers. We are not an existing supplier. We're on the DOS framework, so we're an official supplier to HM government, but this particular engagement was not open to tender. It was direct appointment.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. You talked about a tight deadline in that answer, and Michael has asked, I've read a lot about dual track Agile, but how does it work in reality with such a tight deadline? Is there not a large amount of time used on features that will not be included in the final app? I can see you're whizzing off to a slide. So there we go. Thank you.
It is, this is a very idealized description of it. But the things that did happen that were super useful were all of the I guess I don't want to use the word features because I'll get in trouble, but all of the features were framed as user stories. So each time there was an enhancement to the product or even the inception of the product, it was always framed around user stories that once everyone's agreed on, works really well as a kind of single source of truth. So, mid-project, there's a user story around, say, a self-isolation timer, or sorry, a way for users to know how long they have left in self-isolation. And we might design some views for that and test them and get feedback, and the developers would be able to build that. And in development, they would say, rather than having like a separate modal for that, why don't we just, take that function and put that into that part of the interface, and they can instantly share with us what that looks like or how that works. And in many cases we would go, absolutely, that's a way better way of doing it. So because everyone is thinking about the user story rather than the specific set of screens that we've given them, it allows for there to be flexibility and there's less waste because people don't build things that get thrown out.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen. So I'm conscious of time. We've got a couple more questions that have just come in, and this one's linked more to the performance of the app. So I'd probably share this question as well. And the question is, how did the proximity part work? Is it via Bluetooth? Because me and Ashok, we're quite similar. We never have our Bluetooth turned on because it drains our battery. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that.
Absolutely, that is I could give you a whole presentation on that. So basically, yes, it uses low energy Bluetooth, which is only really available in slightly newer phones, which means that if you've got an older phone, the whole thing doesn't work, which is is not a good thing. But it uses the tech that Apple and Google developed together, the decentralized model, which effectively it checks. It runs little Bluetooth processes, really super low energy ones that can only really reach about 2 meters. So as well as being really super low drain on the battery, it also by definition can't accidentally find a contact that isn't really a contact more than 2 meters away. And it exchanges random IDs, as they're called in the tech, which is basically randomly generated numbers that then go to a central source and look for matches. So if as soon as you get a positive test and tell the app you've tested positive, all the other people that you were in contact with who've got the app over the last 14 days get a notification to say, hey, yes, you've been near somebody that tested positive. And it's only Bluetooth. There's no GPS, there's no tracking, nobody knows who anybody else is. So from a privacy point of view, it's genuine, it's watertight by design. So that's how it works.
Excellent. So me and Ashok better turn on our Bluetooth if we get the app, or always have a charging lead ready to boost us.
It probably uses about 5 to 10% of your battery if you have it on all day.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I still have a lead ready to go. So I can kind of see that we're kind of on the time. There's definitely a couple more questions. So if you don't mind, Stephen, if I just ask one more and then we'll
of course
go from there. So how did you baseline the benefits with such a unique project?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess by starting with services. So, where's that wee image? Oh, I can't find it now, sorry. By starting with, just confusing people. So yes, mapping out the actual services that needed to exist first, give us the baseline. And then, you're not designing websites and apps for the sake of it. You're only designing the bare minimum product that needs to exist to make the whole thing come together. And so that creates a baseline, I guess, in terms of what's needed. And in terms of the overall success, those baselines kind of emerged, to be honest. The likes of the lower number of calls to GPs wasn't really a metric at the beginning, but after about 3 weeks, suddenly it was the metric. And these things did emerge, over time as opposed to immediately.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen. All I can say is this has been a great webinar, sharing great information, and I think your achievements on the last couple of slides speak for themselves, and I hope more people download the app and get the benefits from it. So from my perspective, keep up the good work, and thank you for all your efforts.
That's great, Rob. Thank you very much too, and thanks everybody for listening, and I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. So on behalf of APM and the Northern Ireland branch, again, I'd like to say thank you to Stephen, but I'd also like to extend my thanks to everyone who's joined us this evening. Stephen, just to let you know, there's some lovely comments coming through. Fantastic event. Thank you for sharing. Really enjoying the presentation. So I think that speaks volumes from the people that joined us this evening. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone. Keep well, and we hope to see you at future APM webinars.
Thanks again.
Bye for now.
Good night.